Welcome to the Our Vision Caribbean and Latino Filmmaker Podcast, hosted by Charles Aline and Dr. Christopher C. Odom. On this episode, we speak with produced TV writer and script coordinator Michelle Lesley Johnson. Working her way from support staff to writing staff, Michelle has 9 produced TV credits, including Tyler Perry's House of Payne and Meet the Browns on TBS and Let's Stay Together on BET. In addition to her TV writing credits, Michelle also works as a premium cable and streaming script coordinator on notable shows including The Handmaid's Tale, Winning Time, The Acolyte, and BMF. Take an idea from outline to draft and rewrite one of your existing scripts at the upcoming Script Anatomy TV Draft Intensive with instructor Michelle Lesley Johnson every Sunday from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Pacific Time, September 17th through October 15th, 2023. Click on the link now in the show description. This episode is sponsored by the Our Vision Caribbean and Latino Film Festival, which is dedicated to ensuring that Caribbean and Latino filmmakers have a voice that's heard and a wide audience to showcase their work. Welcome to the Our Vision Caribbean and Latino Filmmaker Podcast with regular host Charles Aline and myself, Christopher C. Odom. Charles could not be with us today, and so today's episode will be hosted by myself. And we have a very special guest today, Michelle Lesley Johnson, who is an expert at television writing, screenwriting. She's a script coordinator, and a little bit later, she's going to tell us about what is going on with the WGA strike. Michelle, welcome to the show.
Thank you so very much for having me. I am quite pleased to be here.
I would ask how long we've known each other, but then I might reveal my age.
Yes, we've known each other for a while.
Way back from the Organization of Black Screenwriters.
Yes, which still exists in a digital form, but I believe that OBS sort of does what we did as a small group, that now they are an organization of small writing groups. So, we set off the trend.
So Michelle and I were members, and were you ever an officer of OBS?
I was not. That was you.
That was just me for a very short stint. We had a splinter group, a writing group, where we would meet week for week and work on each other's script. Sometimes it would get heated. I think Tash was going to kick my butt one week. From my feedback. Yes. She's doing quite well, though.
Yes, she is. She is. The Organization of Black Screenwriters. I think you can find that online as obswriter.org or .com, but they also have a Facebook group. It used to be a group that met monthly as a big group where we had speakers, and sometimes there would be courses or workshops. And now they are more of a virtual group that connects people with like-minded writers to have virtual writing groups. So if people are interested in meeting fellow writers and workshopping their works in progress, then it's still a great opportunity.
Yeah, actually, when we had the general meetings, we actually met at First AME Church, right?
We met at Golden Mutual.
Golden Mutual. It was near. Okay, yeah, but same general neighborhood. Yeah, yes, I remember it now. Oh, I'm getting old.
Yeah.
So you have an interesting background, Michelle. So introduce yourself to the audience.
Well, I am a working class woman, born in Baltimore, raised in North Carolina, educated in North Carolina and California. So have degrees in communications with an emphasis on production from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I also have a master's degree in education from the University of California, Berkeley. And those experiences have allowed me to have a career as a writer and a script coordinator in Los Angeles. So taking my first writing courses as an undergraduate, and then continuing forward through our membership in the Organization of Black Screenwriters, as well as winning two prominent fellowships, one through USC that was sponsored by the Doctors Cosby, as well as another incubator sponsored by the Fox Broadcasting Network, that was also a wonderful experience. So I am a person who has used some of the traditional educational backgrounds and professional backgrounds to make a headway into the entertainment industry, which I hope is going to be an interesting topic for your listeners and your viewers.
So you mentioned fellowships and incubators.
Yes.
I'm a big fan of the different fellowships, especially diversity fellowships, which are open to all protected classes, which could be age, race, gender. So it's not just necessarily people of color when they say a diversity fellowship. Tell us a bit about what the experience was like with the fellowship, with the incubator, and what you had to do to get into those programs.
Well, I'll concentrate on the Fox programs. It is still ongoing. The Cosby program is now defunct, but a little piece of it is it was generally for intermediate writers. So some fellowships are about beginners, but the majority of them are about people who already have polished samples that they're submitting. So the Cosby Fellowship was about someone who was at an intermediate level who needed a push to the next level, being able to be staffed on a television show, being able to be hired to write a feature level film. And often our members moved on from the Cosby Fellowship to entry-level jobs in television writers' rooms, as well as into other fellowships that perhaps were paid fellowships or fellowships that were sponsored by the networks, which had a direct path to employment. So the Doctors Cosby felt like if they were able to sponsor intermediate level writers who were aware of their history and culture, that would be a great thing for television. So we met 2 nights a week on USC's campus. One night was dedicated to learning Black history and culture. And then the second night was devoted to workshopping our scripts. I was a TV comedy fellow at that time. So I ended up, I'm not going to date myself, but I wrote a spec of a half-hour single cam comedy. And then while I was in the program, I wrote another spec of a half-hour multicam comedy. And if people are not familiar with writing for television, a single cam comedy is a popular single cam comedy or a half-hour show that's on nowadays is something like The Bear on Hulu, whereas a multicam comedy is something like The Neighborhood on CBS. And we call them single cams because single cams are shot like motion pictures, generally with one camera, multiple locations. And a multicam is generally shot with 3 or 4 cameras on a sound stage. And before COVID, it used to be, in front of a live studio audience. Since we have had the COVID pandemic and epidemic, COVID pandemic or epidemic, some of the shows no longer have live studio audiences to keep the cast and the crew safe, because obviously actors, for the most part, cannot appear on screen masked. So in general, everybody around them is masked and they are unmasked for their safety. So you write these sample scripts, which we call speculative scripts, because you're writing them not getting paid for them. They're speculative. You are investing in yourself and in your career by taking the opportunity to write a sample that proves to other people, primarily network executives and television showrunners, that you are well versed in how to tell a story, develop characters, and if it's a comedy, obviously give some laughs. So the system has changed slightly from that time of that Cosby Fellowship, and now we write less speculative pilots or speculative episodes, which means that we took something that was already on the air, generally for a season or two, because you didn't want to get too long in the tooth. You wanted to be able to have something fresh to say about something that was very popular or awards worthy. Nowadays, we switch to the speculative or original pilot. So after years of reading spec episodes of shows that people were watching, and that perhaps that, showrunners and execs sort of, they would be reading dozens of these, if not hundreds of these, I think they just got tired. And they wanted to know what original voices that people had. So now the tide has sort of tipped the other way. And rather than see if you can replicate a current show on the air, what we're asked to do as emerging writers, some people still use the old nomenclature of baby writer. Now there is a new term that is called pre-WGA writer, with WGA standing for the Writers Guild of America. I prefer emerging writer, which means that you are a writer, you are emerging into the industry. And what they're asking for us to do is to write original shows, to set out what is the pilot or the first episode of what we think is an original idea that really gets to the core of your voice, your point of view, and to see if you can set up a world that looks like it has legs. That used to be, could you get to 100 episodes? Now, lots of shows are made by streamers, which seem to tap out at around 3 seasons. So, at this point, you're looking at to see if you have 30 to 50 episodes in you. If you can get to 100, that's great. That's still possible on network television, which is, the old standards of CBS, NBC, ABC, as well as Fox. We at one point might have included the CW on that, but the CW has now new ownership. So they're going to be changing for the upcoming year. I don't know if we would consider them a top 5 network in the same way that we would just a year ago. So when you're applying to these fellowships or these incubators, Chris, you are providing a network or a organization like Sundance with your resume, with answers to essay questions, which generally are about how you see yourself as a writer, how you see yourself contributing to the industry, as well as what is your point of view about your script. Do you have a personal relationship to the world that you've built? So, for instance, one of my award-winning original pilots is a pilot called Hip Hop High. And it is about a down on his luck, broke rapper who ends up taking a job as an inner city assistant principal to save the only home he's ever known, which is his grandmother's home. So, it's sort of, a come to Jesus kind of moment where someone who's got a very big ego and a big personality is trying to help the next generation not only sort of fulfill their dreams, but get the skills they need to be functioning adults in American society. So one of the things that is unique about that to me is that I named the high school in this original pilot Frederick Douglass High School. And it's based upon the real Frederick Douglass High School in Baltimore, Maryland, which is one of the oldest public high schools that was specifically designed for urban African-American youth. And it is more than a century old. Both my mother and two of my sisters went to Frederick Douglass High School.
Wow.
So when you are talking about, this story, well, how did this story come to you? And do you have a connection to it? Well, in addition to having a master's of arts in education, which means that I have dealt with young people in professional and classroom settings, my own family members went to a school like my main character is now the assistant principal of. One of the things that is sort of unique about this character's perspective, however, is that though this is his family high school, he went to private high school and private schools, which is also part of my experience, is that, he's a double fish out of water. So he's someone who's toured the world and been a famous musician, but he's also someone who's actually never been to public school. Which was part of my experience when I was in Baltimore. So you want to be able to tell a story, or at least have a part of the story that is reflective of your experience or the world that you come from. So that's sort of an example of what they might ask you about. What's your connection to your story? So it's less about sometimes coming up with this imaginary world, going back to, the old, Star Wars, let's, build a story about something, that happened, many years ago in a galaxy far, far away. How is this connected to you? But I would also say when you're looking at something like a feature film like Star Wars, or even some of the Steven Spielberg films, even though they are set in fantastical and science fiction worlds, they still have the core of the stories that these young men wanted to tell. They're now old men now, but at the point that they were first making their first films, sometimes they were about family alienation and separation. A lot of the early Steven Spielberg films had to do with, divorce and being the child of divorced parents. He's gotten more into that with something more recent, like The Fabelmans, but if you look at something like E.T., part of what Elliot wants is he wants a friend. And he wants a figure to be able to help him make sense of the world where his father no longer lives in the household. So even those men, when they're creating these marvelous worlds, are talking about father-son relationships. Luke, I am your father. It's about these desired families, these found families. So even if you're creating something that is genre, which means science fiction or fantasy, you still want to have it grounded in real emotion.
So did your experience in the Fox Incubator program lead you to your next steps or your next place in your career?
Well, that sort of, gets into the time that we're in right now, which is with the writer's strike. I applied to the Fox Incubator in the fall of 2021. And again, I submitted a resume. I submitted a complete original pilot. The pilot that I submitted to Fox is a script that is called The Fifth Quarter. And once again, it's based upon some of my personal experiences. With my master's in education, I ended up going to University of California, Berkeley, and ended up with a degree in language, literature, society, and culture with an emphasis on the cultural study of sport and education. And so I ended up taking a job as the assistant director of football student athlete development at
Wow.
Cal. So I was working with, 100 young men between the ages of 17 and 22, 23, who were working their way through schools. The NCAA doesn't like to call it work, but it's work. They're laborers. They're just unpaid laborers. Who are working their way through school as football student athletes. And I took some of those experiences and created this original pilot called The Fifth Quarter, which is about a young woman who is a former professional dancer and choreographer who decides to return to her alma mater to advise and counsel the football team after the tragic death of a football player.
Wow.
The twist is the new football coach is her ex-husband.
So juicy.
Yes. So it's got some soapy elements. It's got some sport elements, and it's about sort of this woman returning to some situations that she actually ran away from, to try to set things right for this young man and his family who lost his life in a very tragic kind of way. So once again, sort of, having an opportunity to have a biography that says, I know this world, to be able to have a resume that says that I am already working in the industry and I've already made my own headway into getting along the path. Because part of what some of these programs is, they don't want you to be a blank slate. They want you to come in at least with a 2/3 written slate. Who are you? Do you know who you are? Do you know what you bring to a professional situation where your job is to sit in a room with, 3 to a dozen more people and come up with new ways to tell stories that we've all heard throughout our lives? Just think about it with a show, something like P-Valley, which our friend Tash Gray, was a writer and producer on. That's a world that people may have never seen before. A Southern strip club and the town that built up the Pank. You're sitting with a Katori Hall who's won a Pulitzer Prize. What do you have to bring to the table? And even though you've never perhaps written on a television show before, you still have to be able to say, I am worth the 6 figures that I'm hoping that you'll pay me over the course of this production this season. So you can't just roll up to Katori Hall and be like, I don't know. You better know something. You better have a unique tie to perhaps sex workers. Or to communities that are marginalized, or to, a deep South background. That doesn't mean that you have to be a woman. That doesn't mean you have to be Black. That means that you have to tell a story. And sometimes that comes from your personal experience, and sometimes it comes from something that you've researched. But you've got to be able to sit at the table, and Katori goes, what are we going to do today? And you have to be able to say, well, I was thinking about, a love story between the owner of the Pank and an up and coming hip hop star. That's something we've not seen before. Okay, tell me more.
The Our Vision Caribbean and Latino Film Festival is the only combined Caribbean and Latino film festival that is Oscar qualifying for short films.
In addition to these amazing ideas that I'm listening to, it's like I'm programming my Netflix watch queue. You've also got some credits. What was the difference between writing something that was your own to writing something for hire for an existing show?
Okay, so in addition to being a script coordinator and being a Fox Incubator fellow, I also have 9 produced television sitcom credits.
Woo!
The most recent, which is not that recent, is for a show that was on BET when BET started doing original programming called Let's Stay Together. And my other credits are working for the gentleman who's known as Tyler Perry.
PP.
So yeah, so the difference is, and again, sort of this scenario where I was sort of talking about you're in a room with Katori, Hall, and she wants to know, what fresh ideas or fresh takes that you have. When you're working for someone else, they're the person who decides what the tone of the show is. They decide. A showrunner is the chief creative officer and the chief executive officer of a television show. And television shows are multi-million-dollar small businesses that are recreated season after season, year after year. So in general, some television shows are made for a couple of $100,000 per episode, but many of them now are made for the cost of a small feature film. They're $3 to $6 million or more per episode. So that's the person who hires perhaps a chief financial officer, like a unit production manager, someone who is going to hire the crew. They're going to work with, a showrunner is going to work with casting directors to be able to cast the show. They're going to hire production designers who are going to be able to design the sets, costume designers, designing and the costumes, hair and makeup, lighting, grips, gaffers. Those are the people who hang the lights and do the electric construction, who are working under the production designer to build these sets. Also, you're going to be on location. You need to have a location manager, someone who's going to find the best places that are going to be in the real world that are going to, create the world of your show. So this is a person who is a manager of a core of people who generally number into the hundreds to build the show that you're watching every week. So that when you're working for a showrunner, you're working on their vision, what they say the show is. When you are asked to write a pilot, you are putting yourself in that person's shoes and creating a world that, at least for that moment, exists on paper. Can you make characters sound real? Can you make the non-dialogue writing on the page, which we generally, call action, can you make that visual? Can people understand by what you've written on the page that you know how to translate what is written on the page to something that another craftsperson, like a production designer or a costume designer, can be able to envision on your behalf? So it's about sort of putting yourself in the boss's shoes to be able to then polish the boss's shoes, because you start at the bottom of the pack. So when you're applying to these fellowships, you're basically saying, I'm ready to start in an industry where I can provide unique ideas and or, almost professional research to be able to help somebody else's vision. And I am prepared to do that because I have built my own vision that you were invested in when you read. Most executives and showrunners and writers, if they're looking to hire a writer, they're going home with dozens of scripts. Can you make your voice stand out amongst that pile? And sometimes that is a phenomenal title. Sometimes that is, a remarkable first page. But generally, what most people want to tell you to do is they want to tell you to have a spectacular first 5 or 10 pages. Now, that doesn't mean that the rest of the script, which is generally going to be 30 to 60 pages total needs to be, a complete bozo. But you want to be able to capture someone's attention so that they want to keep turning the pages in your script rather than go, I've read this before. I've heard this voice before. Let me move on to the next script. I'll keep this person in my okay pile. You want to be the person who's like, hey, I want to read this, over something else. And I want to keep reading it. Excuse me, I'm gonna take a drink of water.
I'll get one too.
So often after you're submitting this packet of information and you're following instructions very well, we're going back to these fellowships, again, they're asking you for specific things and you can't be like, well, I don't have a resume, I won't submit it. Well, I don't have a biography, I won't submit it. No. Some people are like, well, I don't have any industry experience. How can I submit a resume? Does your job involve you leading people? Does your job involve you communicating with people? Have you written and produced or directed a short film? You want to be able to say, I understand what I'm getting into. And I have a skill that can be valuable to this showrunner and to the network or the distributor of this show that's going to make their investment in me. Because when I come in as a staff writer, I may not know anything, but I have to have the aptitude and the potential to be able to contribute to a Pulitzer prize winning playwright or an Emmy or Oscar winning writer or director. So you're presenting the packet that they ask you to. You're trying to do it as well and as professional as possible. And you're trying to have an engaging script. And what you hope to do is to advance to the next round, which is in some places is a semifinal or a final round. So what they're going to do at that point is they're likely going to invite you in and or invite you to a Zoom to have a interview. Which might be something sort of like, this podcast. Once again, can you articulate who you are and what you're going to contribute? And most importantly, are you not crazy?
That's the most important one.
Yeah, I mean, that's honestly, it's like, people are people. People are going to have, they're going to have strengths, they're going to have weaknesses. Some people are going to be more serious. Some people are going to be funny, but more importantly, are you the kind of person that someone wants to spend hours a day with or several months out of the year working with? And if you come off as crazy, it sometimes doesn't matter how creative you are, because people don't want to deal with crazy. Now, once you, get in, and you evidence some talent, then some crazy might be able to come out, but people aren't generally trying to hire crazy straight off. They want to hire productive. They want to hire pleasant. And so, you want to be able to, evidence that, hey, I can hold my own in a conversation and I am not crazy. At that point, you hope to be selected for the program. When I was in the Cosby program, I think there were 6 to 8 of us who were TV fellows. Some of us were writing dramas. Some of us were writing comedies. And then there were another 6 to 8 of us who were feature fellows. And they were writing feature films. Probably our most high profile alumni out of that program is Kemp Powers, who shared an Oscar for the Disney Pixar film Soul, who also was a co-writer and director of the latest Spider-Verse film.
Wow.
So these are career starters. He was also a award-winning journalist, which is how, his first feature film, and now I've lost the thread, but it was the Sam Cooke, Muhammad Ali, Malcolm X, and Jim Brown film, One Night in Miami.
Yes.
So he was researching that while we were in the Cosby program, and many years later, it became Regina King's directing debut and his feature film debut. So the time that you invest in these careers, as you and I know, Chris, can be a decade or more. You have this idea, that for him at one point was perhaps a feature article that then became an award-winning play that he then, turned into a feature film script that someone bought and then someone actually produced it, you are showing not only that you can write one script, but that you have the opportunity, that you have the aptitude to write multiple scripts. So one of the things that was asked of us for the Fox Fellowship is, do you have 2 more ideas at least? So you submitted the script, your resume, your bio, as well as an idea for 2 more things. And in the interview, I ended up meeting with the director of the program, as well as a network executive for the Fox Broadcasting Network. Okay. Fox used to be a larger entity than it is now. It used to own 20th Century Fox and Searchlight. It generally sold all of its studio assets to Disney many years ago. So now Fox is basically the Fox Broadcasting Network. It is Fox News. It is Fox Sports. And it is the Tubi Fast, the free advertising supported television, as well as Bento Box, which is an animated outfit that does their animated shows. So it's a much smaller entity. So when I met with the executive from Fox, she both covers current as well as development. So what happens is most larger networks have a group of people who are looking to develop new voices and to develop new shows. And then you have a group of people who, once the shows are on the air, are watching the network's investment from week to week, making sure that things are advertiser and story appropriate. At Fox, those people are the same thing. So that was a unique opportunity to be able to communicate with someone who is both on the, hey, we're looking for new voices and new series, side of the entertainment industry, as well as someone who's like, I'm on set every day, making sure that people aren't wasting the Fox network money,
Yes.
which are slightly 2 different things. And so throughout the Fox program, what I was provided with was the person who was in my interview ended up being my network mentor. She's the person who followed me from the interview throughout the incubator. I also had a life coach, someone who met with me every week or every other week to sort of, deal with the stress of this industry, as well as being able to articulate, help you articulate what your vision is. I also ended up with a writing mentor who was a co-executive producer on The Cleaning Lady, which was a current Fox show.
I watched that.
Yes, as well as having an opportunity to come in twice a week and meet with Fox executives throughout the Fox businesses. So we met with someone from Bento Box. We met with someone from other Fox shows. We met from people who, at that time, Fox was doing some NFTs. Who knows if they're doing that anymore? The bottom sort of falling out after that, but all the little pieces of the Fox kind of thing. So you're basically sort of enveloped by the Fox family, so you understand what their business is. The expectation is that you're meeting with your writing mentor to go through drafts of a 2-pager. So sort of setting up a 2-pager for what your world is like. So with the Fox is a rewrite program. The thing that you submitted to get into the program, they want you to rewrite and they want you to develop it with a more Fox feel. So I wrote something that was perhaps more on the cable streaming kind of end with just a little bit of broadcast. Fox is a broadcast network. So they have different kinds of things. So they pair you up with a writer who's writing on their network. And they're saying, okay, I've read your writing. I talked to the network executive. This is what we'd like to see. Now, it's your job to interpret what they like to see into your story, but you also have conversations. You're able to ask, okay, is this too soapy? Is this too cably? And where do you want to bring it back into, where people can be able to sell cars and soap and Happy Meals in the middle of this show, because television by its nature is both art and commerce. And if you're Fox, you're leaning on the commerce part because you want to make money.
Yeah.
So you don't necessarily get into broadcast television if you have some grandiose ideas of talking heads. You got to be able to sell commercials in between, and you've got to be able to create a show that makes people want to hopefully watch those commercials and stick around during the commercial breaks and then come right back to the story and figure out what's going on next. So you're working with professionals whose job it is to do that every day or guide that every day. And then you're meeting people within the Fox network companies. At the end of it, we were able to cast our own table reads with actors. We use actors. It was on Zoom because we were still in the pandemic. Actors from across the country. I used actors from New York, Atlanta, as well as Los Angeles to sort of hear your words to make sure, it makes sense as a spoken document. And what I found out from my table read is that my lead character, who I perceived of as funny and caring, was coming off too strident. So hearing that and even hearing the way the actors interpreted it made me understand I need to soften this character. One of the other things is I like, to set up a world. But sometimes doing that takes up too much space on the page, so hearing someone read your action, which for me sometimes leans toward novelistic, means that, hey, what I said in 3 lines now needs to be said in 1 line, to be able to get people to the action, and not, the dreamy setting that, I set up. So, and then Fox would then evaluate it as to see whether or not they wanted to invest more time and money in it. So for my class in the incubator, there were 4 of us. For that particular year, we all ended up being women. 3 of us were Black women. 1 of us was a white woman who was a veteran. They evaluated our scripts and determined whether or not they wanted to invest more money. We ended up with a 5-figure first look deal, which means that for all of the writing that we wrote in the program, as well as all the writing we had written up until the program, the Fox network had a 9-month window to be able to review that and determine whether there were any ideas they wanted to invest in more. So for our year, none of us ended up with a longer term development deal. But what I got out of that incubator was a close connection with my network executive, who has been part of the TV industry since she was a teenager, because actually one of her close relatives worked for another broadcast network. So she grew up as a teenager with a relative asking her, what do you think about this show?
Yes.
Well, what do you think about this movie? What do you think about this book? Do you think that this is a TV show? And not knowing that this relative was sort of asking her to do the job that she's doing now, which is evaluate ideas for their commercial viability. So what I have done is cultivate a relationship with her. Now, what happens next? Well, what happened next was a unprecedented industry slowdown. as the studios decided, after spending hundreds of millions of dollars into building up their portfolios for streaming, and trying to build up a customer base, were tapped on their hands by Wall Street, who said, "We don't care how many customers you have. Are those customers profitable? You're spending way too much money on making too many shows. We want to see what your profit margin is." And they were like, "Oh, you want us to make a profit now?" We were building up our customer base. We were, providing them with lots of things to watch. We were not trying to make them profitable. And Wall Street said, "We want money. We don't want viewers." And so they were like, "Oh, okay, we're going to stop spending so much money on content. We're going to give ourselves raises, but we're going to spend less money on what people are seeing on screen, because it's really hard having meetings and saying no to everyone. And this year, we're going to lean harder into saying no, because what we anticipate happening in 2023 is a really hard bargaining year for the DGA, which is the Directors Guild of America,
Yes.
the WGA, as well as SAG-AFTRA. So those are the directors, the writers, and the actors. And what we're going to do is they're going to ask for some things that seem to be reasonable: fair pay, safe workplaces, diverse and equitable workplaces. And we're just going to say, nah.
No.
And so we're in the midst of a strike. So at this point, that network executive that I developed a great relationship with, the WGA has advised me that I can't communicate with that person, because that person is a buyer, and the Writers Guild is on strike. And what we provide to our buyers is creative content. And what they're saying is, you can't communicate with those people and share content with them, because that's the work that we're withholding. So there were less jobs to be had in 2022. And then there are no jobs to be had in 2023. So what's going on with the writer's strike, sort of segueing into that, is that at one point in this industry, our bosses and our partners were studio heads who took an emerging technology, the motion picture, decided to come where there were 300 days of sunshine, because at that point we didn't have massive amounts of light, and make these little movies and then distribute them in movie theaters where Americans wanted to escape from their problems. And they built up these $100 million companies sort of based upon their gut feelings about what audiences wanted. They gave us 100 years of movies, and then they gave us, 75 years of television. And the primary partners for this business were the writers, directors, the actors. They were sort of like a big bank. They were sort of, like we think people want Westerns. We think people want space epics. We think people want soap operas. And we're going to provide the money for the most creative people that we know to put this on screen. Well, what's happened over the past 20 years or so is that those companies have been bought up by big conglomerates. They've been bought up by GE. They've been bought up by cable companies. They've been bought up by venture capitalists and equity firms. So it doesn't appear that they perceive of us as the creative individuals as their primary partners. They seem to perceive of Wall Street and these people who have no internal gut for creativity, and sometimes don't appear to have a lot of respect for what we do as creatives, and they're chasing dollars. One of the things that people are now realizing is that in chasing a business like Netflix, which started out as a DVD distribution platform that then determined that they wanted to go to streaming and then provided original programming, is that broadcast television and cable television made money for everyone. Everyone made money decades. Movie theaters made money for a century, and they traded it for smoke and mirrors. So we now understand that these streaming platforms aren't profitable. So streaming platforms often, at least most recently, haven't operated on advertising, which is how for years everyone made money. We have soap operas because they sold soap. The TV network started in September, October, because that is when, Ford and Chevy and everyone else released the next model year cars. So they wanted to have millions of people watching and seeing what the new Corvette was going to look like. Okay. Now we have year-round development. Well, what's so special about watching a show that starts in September if every show can be watched at any time and starts at any time? Well, Corvette ain't happy about that. They had a big old window where everyone was watching the new shows, in the same month. And we've decimated that, and then we've said we don't even want commercials. So how do we now make money? Apparently, the executives know how to make money. They're still paying themselves millions of dollars, but they've decided not to pay us. That's what's going on with the writers and the directors and the actors. The directors have signed a deal. The majority of their members are actually not directors. They are unit production managers, assistant directors, which are people who are production people who they basically make paper.
Each year, Our Vision will screen the winners of the short film categories live in theaters on both coasts for 1 week as part of the requirements for Oscar consideration.
So this sounds like a hot mess. How does a streaming network fairly compensate writers if in reality the average streamer is not profitable?
That's what they're trying to figure out. And I think one of the things that is interesting about this time is that we have companies that are telling us we're broke, but they're paying themselves tens and hundreds of millions of dollars. Like, you would hate to go back to someone who said, I will be president and I will take no money from it, but it's still, taking all the money from it and says, well, I will be president and I will donate the funds to blah, blah, blah. And it's not donated that. But, it might be great for some of these executives who've literally paid themselves between $40 and $270 million per year and say, you know what? I'll make my salary $1 to show that we're all, in this together. But you can't say we're broke and you've paid yourself a whole quarter of profits. And now because these companies aren't private anymore, at one point, Walt Disney owned the Disney company. He could keep his finances and the company finances private. But now that these are public companies, every quarter, they have to reveal what they spent and who they paid. So you can't say I'm broke and then, well, this company's broke, but I'm $270 million richer.
So the negotiators at the table would literally have to cut their own personal income in order to do a deal?
It's not necessarily they would have to do a deal, but you can't cry broke when you're driving around in a Maserati and then telling everybody else they need to catch the bus. Yeah. Well, we ain't got no money. Well, you seem to be doing fine. Luck of the draw. So that's the thing that I think is a bad PR move for them, is that you can't, again, pay yourself hundreds of millions of dollars and then tell people that they can't, afford to live in Los Angeles. One of the things is that when you're working in the television industry, you need to work in LA. This is where the writers' rooms are. This is where a lot of the production was before it ran off to Atlanta and Toronto and Louisiana. But the creative forces, we live here. the cost of living here has risen exponentially over the past 5 years. Chris, you haven't lived here in a while, but you used to be able perhaps to come when you're young. You had a roommate for a year or two, then you were able to get, a small 1-bedroom or studio, and you were able to ride it out. The average home price in LA by the end of 2023 will be $1 million. And we're not talking about mansions. We're talking about single family, 3-bedroom, 1-bath homes that will be $1 million. The average apartment here costs $3,000 a month, not including utilities. So at one point when we worked in broadcast television, we worked 22 episodes a season. That was 9 months a year. That was sort of like a teacher's year. We know plenty of teachers who are able to work 9 months and they have, 3 months off the summer. Those teachers don't go homeless. They don't starve. Well, now we're making 10 episodes. 10 episodes is not 22. 10 episodes is 4 months of work, not 9 months of work. So how do you stretch 12 months of living out of 4 months of work? Well, you have to find another job. So you're on your job, always trying to find a new job. And we're all supposed to be writing new original works every year to prove to the industry that we still have new, fresh ideas. So we're working for ourselves, we're trying to find a job, and we're trying to keep the job that is paying our bills at the same time. And there is not enough work that they're willing to, I'm going to say it this way. Again, there was a point where everyone made money and we worked the majority of the year. Now we're at a point where they're rotating through people, and that means our wages become depressed. Because what happens is people who have a decade of experience are willing to work for the same amount of pay that I'd be willing to work for as an emerging writer. So if you have a choice as a showrunner between someone who has written a dozen scripts, that have actually been produced and been on air, or someone who has written a dozen scripts that sit in a drawer in their in their bedroom, who do you hire? Especially if you're going to pay them the same. So how do emerging writers get started? The other thing is our pensions in this industry are often like Social Security. People who are starting out pay in to fund the retirement of the people who've already been in the industry. If people don't consider this a viable career and start in it, who is going to pay into the retirements of the people who are ready to retire now? So those people can't retire. They have to keep working because there's not going to be enough people to fund their retirement. Also, the skills that you developed to be a showrunner, you started as a staff writer, then you became a story editor, then you became an executive story editor, then you became a co-producer, producer, supervising producer, co-EP, executive producer, and eventually you got to be a showrunner. Though, that's 9 to 10 seasons of television. If you never get started as staff writer, how do you get to be executive producer and become this manager of hundreds of people and millions of dollars?
So strike aside, in this newer paradigm of television writing, are you saying that more than half of the writers aren't actually making enough to earn a living?
Well, only 12% of SAG makes any money, much less much less to earn a living. So a lot of these jobs, we come out here with dreams, but there used to be a path forward to at least making a living. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of actors that Americans don't know by name who are still able to pay a mortgage. There are writers whose names you've never seen on a screen at all, who make a living to be able to put their kids through college. We're now at a point where they are depressing wages so much that may not be possible for a new generation, and it's becoming a limited capacity for the people who are currently in the business. I worked for a showrunner who just said to me one day, Michelle, they just ran out of money. They did not run out of money, because now that they're public companies, we can see how they spend it. But
Yeah.
they are choosing not to spend it on the people who are the faces of their product, who are the originators of the ideas that get people to turn in week after week, movie after movie, the people who have the creative vision to know, I want this to be a small moment that's going to stand out a bunch of bombast so that it hits emotionally, versus I want a bombastic, big old, Avengers style game kind of thing. There are people who spend their lives thinking of the things that excite us, that get us thinking, that get us talking, that get us dreaming.
Right now, it feels like negotiations have stalled at a stalemate. How long could this go on? Are they just trying to bankrupt the writers?
I am not in that room.
Okay.
And the Writers Guild of America is in a no comment phase. So there is not information that they are choosing to share with the public or membership. What happened in the last week or so is that it seems as if the AMPTP, which is the group that represents the studios, decided to release their latest offer for the writers publicly, rather than just talk about it with the voted upon and selected negotiations committee, as if to say, we're going to try to do an end run around. So we're going to try to say to the writers, this is what we offered the negotiating committee, and they say is not good enough. What do you think? But we are a guild of elected members. And I should say, I am a former associate member of the guild. So because I have not written a professional script that I've been paid for as a guild signatory writer in a while, my membership has lapsed. But the guild is made up of working writers who elect leaders, who then select people to represent the best interests of the guild. So if we wanted to have an $11,000 member negotiating committee, we could do that. But that's not what the Writers Guild decided. So as a group, the writers decided before the negotiations what they thought was important. Now, the negotiating committee is the group of people who are vetted to be able to determine, is this a deal that we can live with? And imagine, what people are saying is this is an existential negotiation, in the sense of, if this deal does not bear fruit, we cannot logically say to your viewers, come join this industry. It's a way that you can be fulfilled artistically and a way that you can make a living. Obviously, some of us are dreamers, but TV and film is actually a business of doers. People who take their dreams and turn them into action. And when you are doing, you should be paid for what you're doing. We dream for free, but when you got us doing stuff, you need to pay us.
So in addition to being a remarkable writer with 9 produced credits, you're also a script coordinator, and you also teach TV intensive writing. Tell us a little bit about your script writing workshops. And I understand you have an intensive TV workshop coming up.
Yes. So through a program called Script Anatomy, which is the most successful TV writing school in the country, which was founded by Tanya Bachadavera Benitez, and I may have been pronouncing her name wrong, but go to scriptanatomy.com. So script, like a television script, or an anatomy, like Grey's Anatomy.com. And you will see a series of courses, which begins with Televisionary, which I also teach, which is a foundational course of how you build a character and how you build the structure for a television episode. Okay. Once you have that structure in an outline, now you want to be at a point where you're going to write a draft. Okay. And you can do that in our labs. You can do that most especially in a TV draft intensive, which is what I have coming up in September. So September the 17th, October the 1st, and October the 15th. So over 3 classes over the course of 6 weeks, you are led from your outline to a tighter, a more producible, more writable outline into a first draft of a script, generally an original or a spec episode of television, your original pilot or spec episode, and then to the second half. And you are doing this under the guidance of someone like me who has produced credits, as well as in a writer's room like environment of fellow writers who are also reading your work and giving feedback. And so those are the things that I think are really important for developing and emerging writers. You need to have people who are on your same wavelength. That doesn't mean that they're writing the same thing that you're writing, but they are hustling as hard as you are and developing the same level of skills. There is and Dr. Odom, you're familiar with this. There are learning techniques based upon Vygotsky and scaffolding about how people come into their own as knowledge, as learners through the partnership with other people who are at their level or a little bit higher. So what I do is I facilitate a discussion amongst a series of writers, some of whom are here, some of whom are here, and you guys help each other, up. And then as the instructor of the course, I provide detailed notes on each of the documents you turn in, asking you to consider things that might work better or encouraging you to lean into things that are already working. So you get the community of writers and your peers, and you get a knowledgeable expert saying, these are the things that I think would make a more palatable project. And palatable sort of depends on what your goal is. Television in general is not an independent art. You can make an independent film, but television, you need a means of distribution, which is generally a network or a cable, company or a streaming company. Those are people who have already owned the cables and the screens that are going to be in front of people. So you can't just go ahead and go to NBC and go, here's my short film, put it on. You can four-wall, a feature. And what we mean by four-wall is you can rent out a room and decide, hey, this is my feature. But television generally is, capital heavy. You need someone who has built, a television network or a streaming distribution platform to be able to get your work shown. So, so some of it is sort of about, you've got this magnificent idea. How does that become either a viable sample where you are able to present this to a showrunner or an executive and they go, I see something in this person. I want to meet with them. Or do you have a producible episode or pilot, which means that there are elements on the page that can actually turn into real people building real sets, making real costumes, and having real actors and actresses say those words, and we've been making vaudeville, radio plays, motion pictures, and television for decades. Like I said, more than a century. There are some things that will always be the foundation. That doesn't mean that there can't be something new or a new interpretation, but there are some ways that we understand how stories are told through millennia that you sort of have to understand before you can go ahead and decide, I'm going to subvert that. So that's what Script Anatomy does. And TV Draft Intensive, again, over the course of 6 weeks, you go from outline to a full draft in a community of like-minded writers, guided by someone who has done it. Because the other part of my work, in addition to being an emerging writer with produced credits, is I'm a script coordinator. So that means that I am a person who works directly with writers, and I liaison with the crew, the craft people who are doing all the physical things that manifest themselves on your screen. And I make sure that there is some continuity between the stories from script to script, as character to character, and make sure that there are some standards. So for instance, you generally going to have a script that's going to say interior house. Well, whose house? Is it Chris's house? Is it Michelle's house? And is Dr. Odom's house in one scene the same thing as Chris's house in another scene? So I'm a person that writers hire to sort of standardize all that stuff. And I'm one of a group of people who I'm one of the last people who sees the script before it's distributed to the network and to the studio, and eventually then goes out to generally a crew of hundreds of people. The show that I worked on right before the strike started was The Handmaid's Tale. It's a wonderful Emmy-winning show. And so our crew is 400 people. So I'm a person who distributes a script to those 400 people. So everyone from the PA to the lead actress is on the same page every day that they show up to work. Okay. So I'm a person who helps facilitate that process. And as one of the last people to see the script before it goes out, I'm a person who is looking and realizes, okay, it was raining in this scene. We cut away to across the country and we come back and the sun is shining. Is that a purposeful, is that purposeful? Do we want to create the scenario where it was raining and now the sun is shining, which, has some thematic heft to it? Or is this just somebody forgot that it was raining and now we need to come back to rain? So I'm a person who has the ability to sort of, tug the ear of the writer and go, hey, this is rain and this is sunshine. Is this an intentional choice that you made? Or is this something that you want to look at again? Or do you want me to address it and just change the sunshine scene to a rain scene? Sometimes I'm told, hey, just change it to raining. The scene works. Sometimes I am told, send it back to me. I need to look at it because I don't remember those two disparate pieces now, and sometimes it's fine. Another draft is going to come out. We'll fix it then. But I want people to consider rain and then sunshine before we change it one way or to the other, so that's sort of my job. So I've had the opportunity to work on, this would be my third season of The Handmaid's Tale. And in between working on seasons of The Handmaid's Tale, I work on other shows. So once again, because we're now making 10 episodes at a time, I generally need to have another job throughout the year. So I did Handmaid's Tale. Then the end of 2022, I did Winning Time, which is on HBO. The Handmaid's Tale is on Hulu. Winning Time is on what we now call Max. Then that in the beginning of 2022, that was Handmaid's Tale and The Incubator. The end of 2021 was working on a new Star Wars show that they announced at Star Wars Day this year called The Acolyte. And that's going to be on Disney Plus. And before that was another season of Handmaid's Tale, because you can basically I do Handmaid's Tale every year and then another show. And before that, it was the Stars show BMF. So at this point, I work in premium cable, premium streaming. And have worked with a wide variety of writers. So that's also one of the things that I bring to TV Draft Intensive is I know what is a producible script. And because I have won incubators and fellowships, I know what a good packet looks like. And perhaps what is a story that let's say this way, you're like, I've got this wonderful world and I think it has this and this and this and this. I might be a person who challenges you. What's your personal connection to this? When you're sitting in that room with Katori Hall or Tash Gray or an executive at Fox, and they ask you, tell me about yourself, and how does that tie into this script that you have? Oh, I never thought about that. So that's why having sort of an expert leading the conversation can help you. But I think more importantly, what your viewers need to know is you need to develop a community of people who are going to challenge you and support you. And that is the community that Chris, who is now Dr. Odom, and I developed many years ago as members of OBS, where we have all gone on to do a tremendous amount of things. We've gotten into the Guild, we've been nominated for awards. We have finished our PhDs. We are on faculty at world-renowned schools. We are still in the industry, striving, moving forward. And so that is the thing that I think your Latino and your Caribbean viewers and your viewers all across the world need to know, is you need to build community. The world is changing. This industry is changing. You cannot count on what happened in 2022 to be the thing that will be the same in 2023. But what can be a foundation for you is people who support you and people who believe in you. Everything we write and everything we produce does not necessarily have to make money. We still have to be fulfilled people. We still have to be people who pay our bills. So in between the paying jobs, you still need to be motivated. And that's where a group of like-minded peers comes in handy. And at the point where you've built that group of peers, you're helping people and people are helping you. So always have a generous spirit. Always be in a position to help someone else and offer to help them before you ask for something for someone. So those are the things that I think are the foundation of my careers. Number one, loving something and doing something passionately that people recognize you as good at. I was invited into your writing group because apparently y'all thought I looked organized, and it just so happened that I was. So you didn't know me from Alley Cat, but I was invited into your sort of what established group to be like, Michelle, we don't know you, but if you can organize us, we'll invite you into the group. And I said, sure enough. And for 3 years, I helped organize us all to meet on a regular basis where we wrote hundreds of pages. And, those things, moved on to being produced, and award-winning scripts. That became, award-winning films in some cases, and led people to careers that they're still fulfilling today. So again, be passionate, be knowledgeable, be good at something, be generous, and be a part of a community.
I still remember Rich trying to outdo everybody with the food on his day.
Hey, we ate good too. So maybe also the other final thing is to make sure you feed people well, and and you need nourishment. You do need physical nourishment. So this has been a wonderful conversation. Is there anything that I've not addressed that your viewers would want to know?
No, you have addressed everything that I wanted to talk about today. This has been an invigorating, as it has been informative, in-depth discussion with Michelle Lesley Johnson.
And people, please, if you have questions about script anatomy, about my classes, about my experiences, you can find me on Instagram at Hillen2Hollywood. That's HILLEN, the number 2 Hollywood. So at Hillen, at Hollywood, and you can also find me on scriptanatomy.com. Look under instructors, scroll down to Michelle Lesley Johnson.
Thank you very much for coming out today, Michelle, and I can't wait to see Tracy Morgan star in Hip Hop High.
Click the link in our profile now to submit your film to the next Our Vision Caribbean and Latino Film Festival to share your work, reach your audience, and turn your dreams into reality.